Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSet live lectures. Dear friends, today we are going to talk about resources basic concepts. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert Dr. Poonam Kumriya. Dr. Kumriya is Associate Professor in Department of Geography in Miranda House, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome ma'am to our studios and request her to start the lecture. Welcome ma'am.
Thank you, Amit. Today I am going to speak about resources. Wherever you are sitting maybe in a room, you look around, you have a bed, or if you are in your study room, then you have chairs, or if you go outside, if you are living in our cities, you see building, roads, cars, and if you are in a rural areas, you see agriculture fields. So what are these? Or if you go to mountains, it's a beautiful landscape, desert, it's a different ecology, different landscapes. So what do you see all around you? So if you see everything is something natural, something man-made. So these are sort of our resources. So before we go into all these things, we have to see what we mean by resources. We have created certain resources by using the environment, by using the ecology. There are certain natural resources, and by utilization of those natural resources, we have created, or human civilization throughout evolution has created many cultural and infrastructural resources. And whatever we see in our civilization, comfortable life we are living, it's because of the utilization of resources. So today I am going to speak about the meaning and the concept of resources, and whether resource is a dynamic concept or is a static concept. What different type of resources that exist on this earth surface, and then we will talk about different issues and problems related with the resources, how it is happening, what are the interconnections, looking into the different environments and ecological interconnections that are causing problems in cities or in rural areas. So now come to the meaning and concept of the resources. When we talk of resources, if you see your history or evolution of human civilization, we know that there are many wars because people want to expand their empire. So what was that? It was like to have more and more land area under them, because when they have more and more land area, that means more agriculture fertile land, and more agriculture fertile land is more production, more crops that will gives them surplus and gives them power. So land has been always been a basis or platform for the security, for power, wealth, and land hunger, accessibility to water, control over mineral resources. For example, now petroleum is very important. So it is a crucial element throughout the human history. There has been many wars have been fought for all these things. Even now if we see, there are many problems when we talk of water resources. We have to see even within states, in countries where there is a distribution of power, that we fight over this, that this river belongs to us and the water is going for irrigation or electricity to which area. So these are very important resources because our life is based on these resources. So Earth surface, if we see, is provide a stages for human life and useful elements of natural resources. Our all activities are basically based on the land, based on the earth surface, and we are using different kind of resources to make our life more easy, more comfortable, or we are moving towards the scientific and advancement in civilization. So there are so many things in the nature, but to everything we cannot call a resource. Can we? No. There are certain neutral stuff in the resources, there are certain resources, there are certain potential resources, and there are certain reserves and stocks of certain elements of resources. So how to differentiate between them? When we talk of resource, basically we are talking of certain elements which are used by human beings. Human beings in order to satisfy its needs and wants, unless until there is a certain utility of that particular resource, particular elements in the environment or component in the environment, we cannot call this as a resource. So those things are neutral stuff in the environment, neutral stuff in the nature. Unless until we have certain sort of a utility, we find that those things are important for human beings and we started using those neutral stuff, then only we can call it a resources. Natural resources, all the elements of environment or ecology, whether we talk of air or we talk of a water or we talk of land as a fertile soil. So, these are the natural resources. And potential resources, maybe right now we do not have a technology to use those resources, but maybe in future we can use certain resources which we do not know how to use them. So, we can say that everything that exists on the earth's surface which is maybe neutral can be converted into potential resources. Today maybe we are not using those resources because we do not have science or we do not have technology to use those resources, or we do not find them useful right now. Maybe after few years we find even these resources are useful for us in some way, and we can term that as a potential resources, which we are maybe not converted into resources right now, but they can be termed as a potential resource in futures. And then we have reserves or stock of resources, means we have identified those resources that these are not the neutral stuff. Maybe we can use those, these are the reserves and stocks right now available for the humanity to be utilized. So, we can say that all those elements of earth which are useful or necessary for man can be considered as resource. If there is a no utility, no usefulness, we cannot call that particular matter as a resource. So, if we see the concept of resource, it consists of two words, re and source, which shows dependability of a stock over a period of time. That means we are using that particular stock or reserve or component of environment or element of environment continuously, again and again and again. So, it is a dependability over a period of time. This is a resource. So, when we talk of a resource, resources are upon which one relies for aid, support and supply to attain a given ends. We are relies on aid and support means to fulfill human needs and as well as wants to attain a given ends. Given end is a satisfaction. Satisfaction in terms of a maybe agriculture production, satisfaction in terms of maybe infrastructure development, satisfaction maybe in terms of economic growth, economic development or sustainable development. What we want out of those utilization of those resources which we are using in a production process, and ability of a human being or ability of a society or ability of a country to use those resources and take advantage of those resources to attain a given ends. Only these, when we have all these 3 points, we can call those resources as a resources. So, that means we are not talking about a substance, we are not talking about thing. What we are looking at the satisfaction, or we are looking at the function or utility which we are talking about. It is not whether we are talking of a material in an environment or any component of the environment. What we are talking about the function to fulfill human needs and wants, to give satisfaction to human beings. This is what is important when we talk of a resource. Usually there are misconceptions when we talk of resources. Resources, as I have said, that when I said that you are sitting in a room, you have seen chair, but the chair is what? You are sitting on a chair. Chair is fulfilling a function. When you go outside, you see agricultural fields. The agricultural fields are, you are using the soil, fertility of the land, and then you are producing crops. So, that is a function, there is a certain utility is there of soil, that you are getting a crop production. So, is what we are here talking of a function which makes certain component as a resource. If there is no function, there is no utility, we cannot call that material or substance as a resource. And what it has to have, it should be able to fulfill human needs and wants and the satisfaction of human beings. So, if we see it, this is what we feel as a resource. There are two concepts of resources. It has been taken as an economic concept as well as the cultural concept. The Zimmerman in 1930s, he was the one who described resource as an important concept. Earlier it was a field of economic geography. We used to talk about resources in economics only, because this is the more important concept, because we are using these resources in part of a economic production. So, according to Zimmerman, a resource is a response to man appraisal and perception of his environment in a want satisfying capacity, satisfying individual, group or social objective. Okay. That means it is a response on men's appraisal, human being, how they are giving the importance to that particular resource. Is that particular resource is valuable for human being, for a society or not? Maybe it is abundant in environment, but is not useful, or is not that much valuable for that particular society. For example, if we talk about iron, or iron is maybe very valuable for hunter and gathering society or tribal society, because they are making tools with that particular mineral, or other advanced societies which are totally based on the iron ore. So, how we are appraising that particular resource. Another example, coal was very important component when we have seen during the industrial revolution. Everything was coal based, even your transportation lines also, but now that has been replaced by the petroleum. Now everything is based on petrol. So, how we are appraising that particular resource is also important, and the perception of his environment in what satisfying capacity, and that particular resource, how much that resource is satisfying the needs of the society. What are the goals of the society? Is that to have economic growth? If we are using that particular components in of the nature in production system, how much that perception of value of the resource, and that value as how much converting into economic terms. If you see the other definition, that is a cultural concept of resources, Hoggett later on talked about that it is a total of all the material components in the environment. But there are so many resources that exist. There is a vast proportion of number of resources which are not accessible or cannot be used under existing technology. So, is the culture, this is very important, and the technological level. When we talk of culture, here we are talking of advancement in society, advancement in sciences, advancement in technology that are helping human civilization or a society or any country in the world, that help or exploit the resources or to use the resources. So, as economic, we are having interaction of man, culture, man and nature, using the resources in a production system, but Hoggett says is a culture is important, because that decide how much particular resources are valuable and how much we can exploit the resources with the help of technology. So, now I think it is clear to you what we mean by resources. Resources, we are talking in terms of a function, not in terms of a material, not in terms of a thing, not in terms of a substitute or any substance, and it can be an economic resource or it can be a cultural resource. So, in a resource process, man is an important component. Either we talk of economic system or we talk of a cultural system, because with the cultural advancement you have an social advancement and you have a economic advancement. So, when we talk of resource process, a resource process initiated when we extract the resources from the nature, and then we have a utilization of resources, and in the later on we give waste in the environment or in the production system. So, all these three components are very much essential when we talk of a resource process, because if we talk of economic development process or economic production process, we are utilizing the resources. For example, we are mining coal or we are mining iron ore. So, we are utilizing the iron in converting into different goods, maybe producing steel, maybe producing watches, maybe producing something else. So, we have utilized, but after in the utilization in the production process, during production in the factories, in the industrial systems, there is some wastage, maybe in terms of polluting the water, maybe in terms of polluting the land. So, this wastage when we talk about, when we are using the resources of environment, it is bound to happen. We cannot totally, completely discard these wastage. It is part of the resource utilization process. When we extract, then also we create certain problems. When we utilize in the production system, and wastage is always there. And it depends upon the development level of the society, the technological level of the society, how much we extract and how we are using the resources. As I have just given the example, resource utilization process or resource process will be totally different for the people who are living in the tribal society. They are totally dependent on the simple natural resources. Their needs are not so much, their technological advancement and scientific capacities or abilities are not so much that they can use, or even their needs and wants are not so much that they will be using variety of resources. But if you go to the other part of the society, which is maybe developed societies or developing societies in the modern term, you have different type of resource process where natural resources are far more utilized in a economic process. We are using more and more resources because of the technological advancement. So, the rate of exploitation has also increased with the advancement of society and with the advancement in science and technology. So, resource process is very much affected by the level of development of that particular society, group or a community. That also affect with the needs and wants of the society. For example, for a simple where the people are poor, the needs and wants are simple. Simple in the sense they want to fulfill their basic requirements. But on the other hand, there are societies in the developed countries where there is so much of consumerism. They are using the resources, but they do not need it, but their wants are so much that they are exploiting more and more resources with technology. So, resource process is technology based, is time based, is a society based, but in all the process, in all the spheres, the wastage is bound to happen. So, by default in resource process, when we are extracting and utilizing the resources, we cannot avoid the wastages, degradation and pollution. It is part of the resource process. So, can we stop using the resources? This is a major question and we have to think about it. As you know, we cannot stop using the resources. We need trees because we need chairs, we need beds. We need to drink water, we need water for irrigation. We need to have air because we want to breathe or we want to have windmills. So, we cannot stop our whole civilization, our society, even our existence of human beings are totally dependent on resources, though we are at different levels of development. So, the utilization or the resource process is totally different. So, resource, it evolved through time. It evolved from an economic concept to an ecological concept of resources. We have started talking about the resource when we are talking about the Zimmerman. He was a person who took out resources from economics because he realized that economics is important. Economics in terms of industry, economics in terms of a market, demand and labor is important, but everything is based on resources. In every sphere, when you talk of economics, we are ultimately using the resources. So, this concept was evolved as economic resource, and if you see the evolution of this particular concept, earlier it was there were rigid control over the resources, only few privileged groups in terms of maybe zamindars, in terms of maybe king or in terms of maybe empires. Everybody did not have a control over the resources. Certain class, certain people had control over the resources. But then during the discoveries and inventions and especially after the industrial revolution, there was importance of having a utilization of more and more resources, because industrial revolution was totally based on the exploitation of natural environment. So, it gives importance to new kind of resources, and there was total change in economy, that everybody was looking for the privatization, more industrial development, more exploitation and utilization of more and more resources for human society development, and that also has led to change in social society, in culture. This is all we know. So, at that time there was a direct colonization. Earlier they were used to us wars for the resources, maybe in one particular region, in one particular area. With the industrial revolution, we had a colonization. Powerful countries which experienced this industrial revolution, they were controlling other parts of the world to exploit the natural resources. This was the main cause of, because they needed natural resources, they needed different kind of resources which were not available in their country. So, they want to produce more and more, and that is why they went for the colonization. So, each part of the world, almost each part of the or corner of the world was colonized. That was a direct colonization, and then came the free enterprises, and exploitation was much higher of resources. Then came, if you see the history, world wars, great depressions, and that reduces the accessibility to raw material points, because during the world wars, during the great depressions, the accessibility to raw material, because raw materials was provided by the colonizations. Like for example, you have European countries which used to colonize the developing countries in Asia, in Africa. So, the main raw material producing countries were based in Asia and Africa. So, during the world war, the accessibility to these areas were reduced. So, the colonized powers, or the powers which experience industrial revolution, they realized that they have to find new and new resources, so that their accessibility or dependability to these areas should reduce. So, that led to the finding of or looking for new alternative resources. For example, after the world war or during the world war, it was difficult for America to access the natural rubber producing areas in Indonesia. So, that led to the development of synthetic rubber, and you know how much important is that, because without rubber you cannot have wheels, and without wheels you cannot have different vehicles, and your all communication or your transportation is totally based on the wheels. So, that led to the development of new resources, but then slowly and slowly it evolved. And if you see the history, economic history as well as history of different countries, development process, that during this evolution of resource as an economic resource, where we are exploiting these resources at a faster rate, because there is a development in science, there is a development in technology, there is growth of population. So, we need more and more resources, because we want to feed now large number of people. There are large number of people, there are volume of needs have increased, the volumes of wants have increased. So, we have to use more and more resources. So, there was a time in the earlier times when these resources were seemed to be abundant. During the industrial revolution, then also. So, there was a exploitation and then over exploitation of these resources, because they were seemed to be abundant. But as I have said, when we talk of resource process, when we extract these resources, wastage is there. So, because there was abundance, population was less at that time, needs were less at that time, wants were not that much as we have right now. And then at the time, even human civilization of the society did not have that much of technological ability or scientific ability to exploit those resources. Now, we have increased our capacity to exploit those resources. So, if you see nature, environment has its own capacity to assimilate all the negative externalities in itself. For example, if you keep a bread for some days, there will be fungus on the bread, and after some days that fungus will go away and it is all over the bread, and slowly it will become something different, and if you keep it can become a soil or something like that after some years. So, environment has capacity and ability to assimilate all the negative externalities as part of environment, as part of an ecosystem. But what is happening right now with the technological advancement, we have increased the rate of exploitation. We are not giving enough time to the environment to assimilate all the negative externality which are part of resource process. So, after the wars, after the Great Depressions, we have realized that we are too much dependence on energy. We are using resources as a free gift from environment, and these resources are not free gift from nature. We have to pay cost of each and every product we are taking from the environment. For example, if we are cutting too much of tree, then it is a deforestation and degradation. Degradation will lead to or deforestation will lead to the soil erosion leads to the landslide, and ultimately we will lose land, and it will have repercussion at the upper reaches as well as the lower areas on the plain areas of a country. So, it is not a free gift. If we are taking something, we are increasing the randomness in the environment, we are increasing the imbalances in the environment. So, societies have realized that we are now depleting the resources because its rate of utilization is very fast, we are over exploiting the resources, and it is not only the economic resource, we have to think about the ecological concept of a resource. Environmental concept is not a free gift from the environment, we have to pay for our doings. So, we have to consider all these things when we talk of concept as evolved from economic to environmental or ecological resource. Now, coming to the next concept, whether it is a dynamic concept or is a static concept. As you have seen, we have just talked about the evolution. Evolution means it is evolving, it is constantly changing. When it is evolving and constantly changing, it is not a static concept. There is some dynamism in this, and it is a utility based. So, till this section we have talked about what we mean by resources and how it has evolved from economic to ecological concept, how different scientists have talked about resources as economic and as a cultural concept. Thank you. Welcome back. Now, we will discuss about the dynamic concept of resources. Concept of resource have evolved from economic to ecological concept. So, there is an evolution when we talk of this concept, which shows certain type of dynamicity in this concept. There is no static values or concept in a concept of a resource. Because we have talked about the utility is latent in this dynamic concept of resources. Utility is latent and utility changes with time, utility changes with the needs, utility changes with the wants and the requirement of a person or a society. Scientific progress has increased the utility because there is an advancement in technology. So, as utility changes, the concept of resource also changes, needs and wants also changes of a particular society or of a group or of a country. So, this concept of resource is constantly changing and evolving. It is not static to a time period, it has not stopped in particular time period. If it would have, then would have stopped in sometimes in ancient times and we cannot use the resources right now. But it has evolved from the ancient times to medieval and to in the modern society where we have many resources to depend on in a different way, and needs as well as wants have become more and more important. Now, maybe in terms of resources we have started looking at the universe to find out more and more resources, explorations out of the outer space or within under the sea or underground of the water. So, there are different perspectives with which has happened with the changing technology and advancement in society. But when we talk of resources, in this resource and resistance exist side by side, means we are using the resources, but we have to overcome the obstacles and resistance that is there in the environment or nature. For example, we have seen this development of all urban civilization which we talked about in history, because there are certain river valleys. If you know, we are talking about industrial civilization, we are talking of Mesopotamian civilization, we are talking about Babylonian civilization. So, what? These civilization came up or developed as an urban centers because there was availability of water, and people or society of those civilizations were able to take the advantages by overcoming the obstacles. Why we can count down, there are 6-7 civilization, urban civilization in the world when we talk of earlier urban civilization. But if you see, water exists everywhere in the world, there are so many rivers in the world. Why we can count these civilization all over the world? Because resources of that particular area has people have able to utilize the opportunity to come up with the resistance, because resistance comes side by side when we talk of resource process, and it is extent of human satisfaction when we talk of resistance. For example, if we find there is a lot of petrol is there in Antarctica, but extracting petroleum from Antarctica will cost so much. So, resistance is that it's difficult to go there. If we reach, then it is difficult to transport that petrol to the mainland, and to which country. So, there are so many resistance when we talk of resources. So, resources exist with the resistance, and resources are created with the efforts of human beings. So, there is a utility, there is a function of resources, but then man has to use technology and sciences to use these resources, and utility changes with the change in place and the passage of time, because it is a dynamic concept. So, interaction of man, culture and nature decide the resource pattern, resource process of particular country. So, when we talk of resources, this is the interaction between MNC is very important, because man only can utilize nature, and with the through cultural advancement, through cultural development, it can exploit or create more and more resources in the world. So, exploitation and conservation of resources is a dynamic process. It is changing with the uses of natural resources. In somewhere it is causing scarcity, and somewhere it is causing abundance. Again, the concept, it's satisfying need and want, but then it depends upon the human appraisal of that particular resource. For example, certain resources very valuable right now, maybe as the resource will become very valuable, its demand will increase and it will lead to the scarcity, and if resource is not utilized by human being, it will remain in abundance. So, the exploitation depends upon the appraisal of the value that is required of requirement of that particular resource for the society by the people. So, it is a constant changing and evolving concept which cannot be stopped at one period of time. So, we can say that resources are not, they become, because it is a continuous evolving relationship between nature, man and culture. So, everything that is there in the environment, lying in the environment, can only become a resource when we talk of a relationship between these three components of nature, culture and man, because man is utilizing the nature through the cultural development, through the scientific development and creating new and new alternative resources. Moreover, it is important the accessibility of resources in terms of a communication development. Maybe there are certain resources there, but we do not have transportation lines. So, we cannot bring those raw materials to our factories, to our industrial areas. That this is also very important when we talk of a resource process or resource utilization. Proximity and economic utility in present terms is also very important. If resources utilization or in a resource process extraction is causing too much of economic values, maybe that will not fulfill the function to use that particular resources. Nearness to resources as well as the economic value of extracting those resources should also be a viable, so that human society can use those particular resources. Adequate supply is also very important. For example, if there is some ore we want to extract from some mineral want to extract from the ore, so the composition and the quantity of that particular mineral should be to such an extent that we can exploit it, we can use it. Otherwise, it will not be economical value of that particular resource. If it will increase the economic cost, it is not valuable, it is not feasible to use those resources. And most important is the evaluation of those resources. We have to have evaluation of natural, cultural and infrastructural resources. Which resources are important, how much we have to use it, how much we have to keep for our future generation, whether we want to use all the trees right now or we want to keep it for future also. So, evaluating the resources, whether these are scarce or depleting or diminishing or in abundance, is also very important when we talk of the concept of a dynamic resource. So, Zimmerman again in 30s he talked about functional model of resources, and he talks about that the interaction of man in a primitive society. Man exists, according to him, man exists at the two levels, one is animal level and another is super animal level. Animal level, he talks about the interaction in a primitive society when man belongs to maybe to animal stage, part of ecosystem without culture, and at that time man has basic wants, basic needs, local physical human capacity, not having a cultural advantages. Not having a cultural advantages means do not have ability to exploit nature or environment to use the resources, and there are certain resistance, because when ability is less at the time, if you take an example of men in hunter gathering stages, ancient men or stone men, then there was a simple basic needs of what were the basic needs? Basic needs of food, shelter and clothing. And at that time the utilization of resources was also very simple, in a way of simple tools, maybe in a way of drinking water, maybe utilizing air as for breathing, because you do not need technology for all these things. So, the capacities, human capacities, physical capacities were very simple, but in a simple way man was also using the resources, natural environment, overcoming the resistance, and over a period of time they overcome the resistance by the values they come to know about fire and domesticated animals. So, slowly the interaction in a primitive society became complex, because men learned to use the natural resources, exploiting the resources from the environment, creating more and more resources to satisfy basic needs and wants in that particular society. But then came the culture, man at the supra animal level, that level where man can keep himself or take away himself from the environment. At the animal level, man is part of the ecosystem, it is not away from the ecosystem, it is one of the component of the ecosystem, which talks about maybe there is a vagaries of climate, maybe he has to save himself from the floods or storms. He does not have any capacity or ability to build dams at that time. But then with the cultural environment, with the cultural development, with the social development, after utilizing natural resources, men able to create certain abilities, maybe in form of a culture. He has wants and abilities, but in a better way than the simple utilization of natural resources in the primitive society, and overcoming more and more obstacles and resistance, producing a cultural wedge which again affect the utilization of resources, that it is becoming that more and more exploitation of resources, and human beings are finding more and more alternative resources to use for the advancement of society. So, this is concept of resource where we talk of dynamism and how Zimmerman has explained the interaction of man, nature and culture. Earlier man was part of nature, and but the cultural advantage we have seen how much we can use or extract from the nature to be talk about different kind of resources. So, why to classify the resources? With the cultural development, there are so many resources, and in order to systematize things on a different criteria, we try to classify resources into different categories. For example, on the basis of origin, we can talk about natural or human resources. Natural resources, it can be air, water, trees, or human resources which we have made through the cultural development. Maybe these are roads, buildings or any infrastructure which has been created, because again these resources which we are using again in the production system. For example, if we have created roads we are using roads for transporting raw materials. If there are factories, we are using factories as a resource because production process is going on. So, there are certain natural resources, then there are certain human resources. On the basis of location, we can divide into life or space where they are found. Life based resources again can be divided into organic and inorganic resources. When we talk of organic resources, we are talking of forest, for example. It is an organism which has life, they are inexhaustible and they have regeneration capacity. Inorganic resources, we are talking of minerals, which there is a stock or fund of resources which cannot be increased. There is certain exhaustive or stock available with the nature. And space, when we talk of space where they are found, we are talking of a platform. It can be land, it can be water. Next is the based on the continuity of resources, means stock or flow. Do we have just reserves which we can quantify, or we have a flow of resources, maybe in terms of a water, maybe in terms of a air, okay, or nature of occurrence, whether it is a ubiquitous where everywhere it can be found, for example air, oxygen in air, or commonalities, maybe agricultural land. It is not everywhere, but there are many places where we can find agricultural land, or rarities. Very rarely we found that particular mineral, or uniquities. There is certain just few places where which can be counted that these, for example tin, it can be counted where we can found these mineral resources. So, on the basis of occurrence also we can classify resources into different categories. Then another classification can be on the basis of conservation. This can be divided into exhaustible resources or inexhaustible resources. Exhaustible, as the name suggests, that it can end, it can be exhausted. If we keep on using or utilizing those resources at the rate which we are using, over a period of time it will be finished. We cannot replace those resources. Inexhaustible resources, that we have continuous availability of those resources, maybe in terms of, for example, solar energy, or maybe in terms of a tidal energy, or in terms of a geothermal energy. So, there is a continuous availability of those particular resources. Mineral resources, coal resources, iron, we can mine them, exploit them, and over a period of time we will realize that all the resources are finished because we are using the resources. Next classification can be on the basis of property of resources. On the basis of property, we can divide resources into private. Private means one individual is responsible or owning that particular resource. It can be a land, we all have our houses on a land, or we are living in a flat. So, that is our private property, or we talk of a public property. It is built by the government, government has a responsibility and people are using it, but there are certain common resources. Common resources, it is for everyone's utilization. For example, forest, for example, water, for example, air. These are the common resources which all the people can use. There is no control over those resources. These are it is owned by the state, but then people are not responsible for this. And then we talk about the tragedy of commons, that there is a tragedy related with the common resources because everybody is using it and nobody is responsible to take care of those particular resources. Either we talk of water or forest resources. So, we classify resources in order to make the things systematic, in order to make things based on the criteria, so that we can plan our resources and evaluate in a way that we can continuously keep on using the resources. That is why classification is very important. This because as we have talked about, we have listened, we know about the resource processes, that wastes are bound to happen. Negative externalities we cannot just avoid it. We can try to reduce those externalities, but because of the rate of exploitation, because of the scientific development, as our population is growing, as our technology is advancing, we are using more and more resources and creating problems in the environment. For example, most of the world land has been degraded as a soil erosion or due to the excessive use of agricultural fertilizers. It has caused salinization, or there is a nutrient depletion because we are continuously using that piece of land for agriculture production, and cutting too much of tree causing increase of deserts in the world, or we see the water problem. Water is polluted, whether we talk of a fresh water, water in rivers, pollution due to industrial wastage, pollution due to agriculture wastage, or pollution due to sewage that is coming into the rivers. We all have seen how rivers are polluted all over the world, and we can even talk about underground water pollution because of our industrial dumping or waste dumping or nuclear testing. We are also creating underground water pollution, or we are excessively withdrawing water from the underground aquifers. So, ultimately those aquifers are drying up. So, when the aquifers dry up, the whole land is also subside. So, it is numerous problems we are creating by the utilization of resources in the environment. So, for example, again there is a species extinction far higher now than pre-human's time, because our needs have increased, our wants have increased, and ability to use the resources, utilize the nature has also increased at a far greater level. So, we can talk about certain causes of resource depletion. It can be a rapid population growth, because when we are adding, right now we are more than 7 billion in the world. So, more and more people means more and more foods, more and more other needs and wants. To create all those things in the system, we are using more and more resources than we are using earlier, or process of economic growth which is unsustainable. Maybe we are looking because we want to have progress, we want to have development, we are extracting resources, over exploiting the resources for economic development or unsustainable uses of resources. We are not thinking of future, we are constantly exploiting, constantly mining, constantly cutting the trees in order to fulfill the demand of the present generation. So, these are unsustainable, or maybe there is so much of wastage of resources when we are cutting the trees or we are using the resources. We are not using appropriate technology so that there can be minimum wastage when we utilize the resources, or we are not able to increase the efficiency of utilization. If we increase the efficiency and there is a minimum wastage, maybe whatever resources we have, we can use those resources in a much sustainable manner. Or poverty, where we need resources to remove the poverty from the world, and not including cost of environmental goods in the economy. We have to have proper evaluation. As we have evaluation of economy, we have to have environmental accounting of each and every resources. For example, for planning purposes, each and every country should know how much tree stand is there. Though in our country we are talking about the species, or we are talking about the spatial extent of the forest area, but how many trees in that particular spatial extent, we have to have total quantification of number of trees, maybe species wise, maybe region wise, in any sense, so that we can equal the input and output in an economy. We can value, we can terms into monetary system, monetary valuation, so that we can keep certain resources for present, as well as we can keep certain resources for the future generations. And most important problem which we see is the lack of awareness and cooperation between different organizations at a local level, at a national or at an international level, because everybody wants to use the resources. There are global resources, there are some common resources, and everybody wants to have right to use the resources, but how to conserve the resources. For example, if you talk of a global warming or we talk of a carbon emission, each country has to reduce its carbon emission, but how to reduce this? You have to apply environmental laws, you have to have technology, you have to maybe reduce your production so that you can conserve your environment. But then there is a tussle, there is a dichotomy, there is a irony whether we go for economic development, economic growth, or we go for environmental sustainability. So there are dichotomies when we talk in a process of a resource utilization, and we have to think about it. We have to look into that we have most of the efficient utilization with a minimum wastage and maximum utilization. So we have to create awareness among the people that we have to talk about evaluation, we have to talk about accounting, we have to talk about environmental impact assessment of our economic as well as environmental activities. Then only we can stop the resource depletion and extinction of resources, whether in terms of a species extinction or whether in terms of a and finishing of stock of resources, or we are talking of a flow resources. So we have to increase the awareness among the people. So there are many environmental problems we are talking of, maybe problem of air pollution, maybe biodiversity depletion, food supply problems, or waste production problems. These problems, as we have discussed, is bound to happen. We cannot avoid it. We can, by default, it is part of an economic process, it is part of resource utilization process. What we can do, we can just increase the efficiency and reduce the production. How it happens? Because population is there, we have people and we have to produce for them, we have to give them food, we have to give them shelter, we have to give them maybe cars, maybe in certain society there is mode of transport is maybe aeroplane, or everybody wants to own a boat. So it depends upon the needs and the wants and technological impact on per unit of consumption. In many societies there are needs are there, in many societies there are more wants are there. So in totality we are polluting and degrading the environment. So what are the interconnections when we talk of utilization of resources and environmental problems? There are most important aspect is that we are ignoring the ecological laws that are function, which we cannot avoid it. For example, there are 4 important variables in the ecology or in environment: matter, energy, space, time and diversity. Matter, when we talk of each and every component or material in the environment have its own physical and chemical form. The problem is that we cannot create or we cannot destroy atoms or throw away. So what happens then? There is a problem of quantity of waste and pollutant that remains in the environment. According to the law of matter, we cannot create it, we can only transform one material to another material. We cannot totally destroy it, we cannot claim to destroy. So what happens? It remains in the environment, and as much resources we are using, we are creating more and more problem of persistently concentration of that particular matter in the environment. And according to the laws of thermodynamics, when it is related to energy, that we can, first law states that we cannot create or destroy energy, maybe we can convert energy from one form to another form. And the second law becomes more important, that conversion of energy in a economic process, it involves a degradation of high grade of energy to low grade of energy. So whenever we are using energy, for example, sun energy is coming into a process and we are maybe using use for agriculture production coming into the plants. So when we talk of sun, it is a high grade energy, when it is coming to the plant it is a little lower grade of energy, and if we are using those products into different products, In each process, we are converting higher grade of energy to the lower form of the energy. So, as much as we are trying to systematize the environment, we are increasing the entropy level or randomness in nature. So, all the civilization or scientific advancement which we talk about right now, it is more or less that we are in a nature, in a ecology, in an environment, we are creating high level of entropy or randomness. So, what we can say that there is a far greater impact of human impact on nature. There is a fragmenting and degradation of wildlife habitat, and what we are doing, we are totally humanizing the natural landscape as we want according to our needs, or maybe simplifying the natural ecosystem where there was a diversity over a period of time, but now it is a monoculture. Maybe we have planted one kind of trees in that particular area, or maybe we have introduced the alien species in particular area, changing the whole ecosystem, or maybe we have constructed a dam and changed the whole ecosystem. So, there are environmental impact of utilization of those resources which are far negative, far greater, which we can assess. Though we cannot avoid it because we need to progress, we need to have development of all the society, we have to go through all these things. What we can just take care of, resources are very important for human civilization. Our whole civilization, our advancement, our existence is based on the utilization of resources. So, we have to conserve the resources, then only we can have existence of human being. These two things are interrelated. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank ma'am for this discussion, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. I hope you have found this show very informative and usable. On that note, thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.